They thought you would break. They thought silence meant surrender. They mistook your stillness for weakness, your patience for permission, your peace for passivity. But what they did not realize is that silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of discipline, because you were never unarmed. You were just choosing not to strike. You were observing, learning, waiting for the storm inside you to clear, waiting for the pain to shape itself into wisdom, waiting until you no longer needed to speak to be understood. They believed they won because you walked away. But they never noticed the weight you carried when you left. They never noticed what it took not to respond, to stay silent when every part of you wanted to scream the truth. And now, time is speaking louder than you ever could, not with drama, not with revenge, but with correction. The universe does not rush it, waits until the lesson is fully formed, and then it delivers, not always in public, but always in precision. At first, they felt nothing. Life kept moving. They kept laughing, posting, celebrating. But slowly, subtly, the ground began to shift. Conversations began to feel empty. Connections lost their spark. The joy they once faked so easily became harder to pretend. It was not punishment. It was pattern. Life revealing what was always there, but hidden behind noise. They started feeling it at night. The echo of your silence. The weight of your absence. The moments that used to be effortless now feel hollow, because your presence brought peace. And now that peace is gone, not because they took it, but because you withdrew it. You never raised your voice. You never fought dirty. You simply removed yourself from the places where you were never seen clearly. And in doing so, you became unforgettable. They start to remember things they once ignored. Your kindness, your consistency, your way of understanding without judgment. And that memory, it does not fade, it lingers, because the truth has a strange way of surviving the lies. It keeps knocking. Even when the door is shut, it keeps whispering. Even when the world is loud, they may not say it out loud, but the recognition has begun. The quiet collapse of denial, the internal questions, the sleepless nights, the emotional residue of a soul that knows it betrayed something sacred. You were not just someone they lost. You were the version of themselves they didn't know how to hold. And now that version is gone, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. You stopped explaining. You stopped justifying. You stopped justifying. You stopped bleeding for those who made you feel guilty for being wounded. And that was the shift. That was the beginning of your return to yourself. They will call it silence. You will call it healing. They will call it distance. You will call it clarity. Because what you built in the silence cannot be shaken by someone who never took the time to understand your heart. Now, you speak differently. You walk differently. You love differently. Not harder, not louder, but wiser. You've learned that not everyone who asks for access deserves entry. Not everyone who says they miss you deserves your presence. Not everyone who notices your absence has changed. Some only return because their supply ran out. Not because their soul woke up. And you are no longer available for energy that drains, for words that don't align with actions, for apologies that only arrive after the consequences start. Because the new you, the healed you, knows the cost of staying where your peace is compromised. You no longer seek closure because you realized closure was never in their hands. It was in your decision to no longer need it. They expected rage. You gave them growth. They expected a storm. You gave them silence. And now that silence speaks louder than any truth they tried to ignore. It is in the way your energy no longer bends, in the way your heart no longer waits, in the way your love no longer chases. That is the karma, not punishment, but reflection. They look around, and nothing feels the same. The thrill is gone. The mask is heavy. The mirror is clear. And what they see is not what they expected, because they thought they left you behind. But in reality, they left themselves you. You just finally chose to stop following people who never wanted to be found. And now you're free. Not just from them, but from the version of yourself that tolerated the bare minimum. The version that begged for understanding, that tried to prove worth, that stayed too long in places that never saw your value. That version is gone. And in its place stands someone unshakable, silent, focused, whole. Not because the pain didn't happen, but because you made it mean something. You built peace from the wreckage. You turned the breaking into building, and the void into vision. So when they ask what happened to you, the answer is simple. You healed. They thought they walked away clean, thought their exit was casual, temporary, forgettable, but exits have echoes, and theirs is still moving through the silence, still unfolding in places they cannot see, still reshaping the path beneath their feet. At first it felt like freedom, like release, like winning. They confused absence with peace and forgot that peace only exists when your conscience is clean. You never wished them harm. That was never your energy. You only wanted understanding, accountability, truth. But when none of that came, you gave yourself something stronger: distance, clarity, and the choice to let the universe handle what your words could not. Because you learned that some people only understand the language of consequences, not immediately, but eventually, quietly, deeply. They smile in photos. They post new memories. They laugh louder now. But none of that touches the stillness of 2 a.m. When the room goes quiet, and the masks come off, and the truth gets loud. That's where your absence begins to speak. Not in anger, but in energy. It shows up in the silence, after the dopamine fades, in the heavy breath between distractions, in the small moments where nothing feels quite right anymore. Because they didn't just lose a person, they lost protection, they lost presence, they lost the energy that made broken places feel stable. And now they sit in rooms full of people and still feel the void. Not because you made them feel it, but because their spirit recognized what it once took for granted. That's how the universe works. Not loud, not instant, but precise. When you carry good intentions, when you show up fully, love deeply, care honestly, and still get discarded, life does not ignore that. It records it, and it responds. You didn't need to defend yourself. Your integrity already did. You didn't need to expose the truth. Your consistency already revealed it. And now the people they try to connect with do not feel like you. The conversations don't go as deep. The energy doesn't hold as steady. The bond doesn't feel safe. They start searching for what they broke. But it's too late, because you've changed location, not just physically, spiritually. You no longer orbit their world. You no longer respond to their pull. You've become your own gravity. They wonder why the warmth is gone, why peace doesn't stay. Joy feels temporary, and deep down, a voice is starting to whisper. You let go of something real. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. And now you've surrounded yourself with noise, but no soul, with attention, but no depth. They might not say it, but they're starting to feel it. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from loneliness, but from losing something sacred, something steady, something real. That is, the weight of spiritual regret. The kind that doesn't just say, "I'm sorry," but says, "I broke something. I may never find again. You won't see it in their feed. You won't hear it through mutual friends, but you'll feel it in the shift, in the way the energy no longer touches you, because you've outgrown it, outloved it, out-healed it. This is what it means to rise in silence, to let life handle what your hands no longer carry, to stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. You were not too much. You were simply the mirror they weren't ready to face, and when they turned away, they turned from their own reflection. Now they meet people who smile like they did, who say the right words but lack the depth, and they remember you were different, not because you needed them, but because you chose them. And there's a difference. You chose to stay, even when it hurt, even when you weren't seen, until one day you realized your staying was not loyalty, it was self-betrayal. And that was the day everything changed. The day you stopped performing for closeness, stopped auditioning for love, stopped explaining your worth to those too distracted to see it. You stopped shrinking, stopped softening your shine to make others comfortable, stopped watering down your boundaries to avoid discomfort, and instead you became what they never expected: free. They didn't think you'd make it without them, didn't think your glow would come back, didn't think your spirit would ever feel whole again. But healing happens in silence. Growth happens underground. When it finally blooms, it does not need permission. They won't know how to approach you now, not because you're cold, but because you're clear, not because you're angry, but because you're aligned. You don't need to block them or speak their name. You simply stopped responding to a frequency that no longer matches your soul. And now your silence is sacred. Your peace is protected. Your energy is reserved for those who speak your language. So if they ever wonder what happened to you, tell them nothing happened. You just stopped participating in your own disrespect. And once you did, life started to feel like yours again. Healing doesn't begin when you feel better. It begins when you decide to stop going back to what broke you. They may think you just walked away, that you grew distant, colder, detached. But what they'll never see is the silent war you fought just to choose yourself. Because leaving wasn't easy, wasn't convenient. It wasn't something you wanted. It was something you had to do to survive, to breathe, to remember who you were before they made you forget. You tried, over and over. You tried to meet them where they were, lowered your voice, softened your truth, bent your boundaries just to make it work. You loved them through confusion, through distance, through disrespect, because part of you believed love was supposed to hurt a little, that the right people would eventually understand if you just loved harder, waited longer, held on tighter. But love is not pain, and loyalty is not abandonment. Eventually the silence became too loud, the weight too heavy, and your spirit knew you couldn't shrink anymore without disappearing completely. So you stopped, not because you gave up, but because you woke up. You saw the patterns, the manipulation wrapped in charm, the affection used as a leash, the apologies that only arrived when your absence was louder than your presence. And you realized they didn't love you. They loved your access. They loved your energy. They loved the way you held space for their chaos, but never once made space for your peace. So you made a different kind of decision, the kind that doesn't look dramatic, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. You just shifted. You stopped reaching out, stopped explaining your heart to people committed to misunderstanding it, stopped overgiving to prove you were worthy. And in that stillness, you started to hear your own voice again. The voice that said you don't need to fight for love. The voice that said you are not hard to love. You were just in the wrong hands. The voice that said you were never too much. You were just too real for someone who wasn't ready. That voice, your voice, became your guide. And with every step away, you felt a little lighter. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you stopped carrying what wasn't yours. You let go of the need to fix them, the need to be chosen, the need to prove your value. You realized the most powerful thing you can do is walk away quietly from what doesn't align and rebuild without making noise. That's where your power came back. Not in a fight, but in a release. You no longer needed to see their karma. You no longer cared about closure. You no longer needed them to admit what they did, because you weren't looking for justice anymore. You were looking for freedom, and that freedom was found in letting go of the story that told you you weren't enough. You were always enough. They just weren't ready. And sometimes, that's all the truth you need. Now you show up differently. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't tolerate energy that feels heavy and inconsistent. You don't explain why you protect your peace. You just do, because your peace has a price, and not everyone can afford it. They might try to come back with apologies, with promises, with recognition that came too late, but you'll feel it. The shift, that moment when you realize you no longer crave what once kept you up at night. It's not bitterness, it's growth. You don't hate them, you just no longer need them. And that's the healing. When your heart no longer aches for what was, but beats steady for what's next. You've become someone new, someone softer with yourself, stronger with your boundaries, quieter with your time, and louder with your love for yourself. They won't recognize this version of you, not because you've changed, but because you've finally come home to who you were always meant to be. You don't argue, you don't prove, you don't defend. You simply live in peace, in truth, in alignment. And in that space, you attract what matches you. People who love without conditions, connections that don't require performance, environments that feel like safety, not survival. This is the gift of the silence, the transformation that happens when you stop begging to be seen and finally decide to see yourself. They thought you lost, that walking away meant defeat, but walking away was the victory. Because you didn't just leave them, you left the cycle, the confusion, the exhaustion, and now you are rising, not to prove anything, but because peace grows where you're no longer shrinking to fit. This is what healing looks like. Not loud, not perfect, just steady. And in that steadiness, you've built a life they no longer have access to, not out of revenge, but out of respect for yourself. Some people don't realize what they had until silence replaces the sound of your care, until your name stops showing up on their screen, until the energy you once poured into them returns back to you. And at first they don't notice. They think you're just being distant, that you're taking space, that you'll come back like you always did. But this time you didn't pause. You ended, not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of self-preservation, because you finally understood that staying too long in the wrong place isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. You gave your love freely, fully, fiercely, and they mistook that love for weakness, treated your kindness like currency, spent it until there was nothing left. You kept showing up. Even after the red flags turned into walls, you kept hoping they would meet you halfway, even when you were the only one doing the walking. But hope becomes heavy when it's one-sided, when the love you give becomes an expectation, and the pain they cause becomes your responsibility to forgive. So one day, without noise, without warning, you just stopped reaching, and that silence, it shook them in a way your words never could, because you were always the one who made it work, the one who understood, the one who smoothed the tension, and picked up the pieces. And now that you're gone, they're left with what they created. Distance, disconnection, and a reflection they can't look away from. You didn't have to make a statement. You became the statement. Your absence said what your presence was never allowed to express. It said, I deserve peace. I deserve depth. I deserve effort. And if you can't give me those, I'll give them to myself. It's not that you stopped loving them. You just stopped breaking yourself to keep the love alive. You realized that true connection doesn't make you question your worth, doesn't make you shrink to be chosen, doesn't make you feel alone while you're still standing beside them. So you left, not physically at first, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You stopped trying to prove. Your heart stopped auditioning for attention, stopped explaining wounds they kept reopening. You walked away with everything they never noticed. You carried your loyalty, your grace, your forgiveness, your second chances. And now they feel the shift. It's in the way you don't check in anymore, the way your name has gone quiet, the way your energy no longer wraps around their chaos. At first they distract themselves, convince themselves they're better off, blame you for the silence. But eventually, that silence starts to echo in old songs, old places, old conversations. It shows up in the most unexpected ways. A memory they didn't mean to recall, a scent that brings you back, a quote that reminds them of something you used to say, and slowly, the realization sinks in. They didn't just lose a person, they lost peace, consistency, real love, and they can't replace it because what you gave came from a healed heart, from an honest place, from depth they didn't know how to handle. And now they're left chasing moments that feel like you, but never quite match, because your presence was never performative. You didn't give to get. You gave because it's who you are. That's what makes the loss so heavy. You didn't leave to punish them. You left to protect yourself. And that distinction, that's what stays with them. It's not revenge that teaches the hardest lesson. It's reflection. When they realize they weren't the one who left, they were the one who made staying impossible. And by then you're no longer available for explanations, no longer reachable by old patterns, no longer responding to energy that took you for granted. You don't need them to understand. You don't need an apology. You don't need anything, because the version of you that begged for clarity, that tolerated emotional chaos, that compromised your peace for connection, that version is gone. In its place stands someone softer with boundaries, someone who doesn't fear losing people who never truly saw them, someone who knows that peace isn't found in fixing others. It's found in choosing yourself. You've learned that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your life, that not everyone deserves a second chance at your heart. That closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision. And you decided to heal, to grow, to rise, to stay silent in the face of chaos. Because you know, now, your energy is sacred. They'll think about you. Long after the silence settles, they'll remember the way you cared, the way you made them feel, the way you stayed when no one else did. And when they finally understand what they lost, they'll wish they had listened before your silence became permanent. But by then you won't be waiting. You'll be free, not because they apologized, not because they came back, but because you did. You came back to yourself, to your peace, to your wholeness. And that is the kind of return no one can take from you. At first, they don't notice. The weight of your absence doesn't drop all at once. It arrives in fragments, in silent gaps. In the subtle ways, life starts to feel off. They wake up to the same routine, same people, same world, but something's missing. It's in the way their laughter feels thinner, the way conversations fall flat, the way victories feel hollow, and slowly they begin to sense it. The shift, the void, the soft ache where your presence used to be. You didn't take anything from them, you simply stopped giving. Then that silence, that loss of energy, that missing heartbeat in their life becomes louder than any goodbye ever could. They'll go through moments where they try to explain it away, tell themselves you just grew distant, that maybe you were sensitive, overreacting, too emotional, but deep down, they know you were the calm in the chaos, the anchor in their storm, the presence that softened every sharp edge in their life. And now they're left holding pieces of a connection they never knew how to protect. It's not that life is punishing them. It's not karma in the form of some dramatic collapse. It's the quiet unraveling, the loss of peace, the erosion of ease. You didn't curse them. You didn't speak badly about them. You didn't seek revenge. You simply removed the access. And now the doors that once opened easily now resist opportunities they took for granted, now feel hard to grasp. Support they expected now feels distant, because when you lose someone who prayed for you in silence, someone who rooted for you in private, someone who held you in their spirit, when you didn't even notice, you don't just lose them, you lose what surrounded them. The blessing, the light, the quiet grace that held your life together in unseen ways. People underestimate energy. They think it's just emotion, just chemistry, just chance. But energy is everything. And when your energy is sacred, when your heart is pure, when your love is real, your presence becomes a force. You heal what you touch. You hold what others drop. You love with intention. And when that leaves, even the most stubborn soul feels it. They may not say it, they may not admit it, but they notice, in how nothing feels quite right anymore, in how their new connections feel, surface level, conditional, performative. They miss how they didn't have to try with you, because you gave from love, not leverage. Now they meet people who give to get, who speak in strategies, not sincerity. And part of them, quietly, painfully remembers you weren't asking for perfection, you were asking for presence. You weren't demanding change, you were hoping for care. But what they couldn't give, life took back. Not as a punishment, but as a reset, because you were never meant to stay in places that dishonor your spirit. So when you finally walked, the energy shifted. For both of you, your light no longer fueled their world, and their absence no longer dimmed yours. You started to rise, not in revenge, but in restoration. You found laughter that didn't come with apology, love that didn't come with confusion, peace that didn't come with performance. And they began to unravel, not visibly, not instantly, but deeply. Because healing leaves behind shadows, and they now live in the shadow of the love they lost, not because you wished it, but because they created it. They didn't protect what was real, they mishandled the rare, and now they sit with what's common, connections that fade quickly, trust that never roots, love that vanishes when tested, and every time they reach for something genuine, they feel the weight of what they gave away. That's the thing about spiritual connections. They don't just disappear. They haunt you, not with fear, but with reflection. They show you the difference between what you want and what you needed, between what you chased and what you lost. And when they realize you were the peace in their chaos, the love in their loneliness, the stability in their storm, it won't bring them anger, it will bring them silence, because that's what regret sounds like. Not loud, but heavy, not sharp, but sinking. And by then, your life will have moved on, evolved, expanded. you'll be surrounded by the kind of energy that feels easy, aligned, true, and they'll sit with a truth they can't escape. You weren't just a person they lost. You were the balance in their life, the mirror they avoided, the love they couldn't return. And when they wonder why nothing feels like it used to, why peace is harder to find, why their own reflection feels unfamiliar, the answer will always be the same. Your absence became the karma their own choices delivered. There's a moment most people never talk about, a moment that doesn't come with tears or anger. It comes with clarity. It doesn't shout. It whispers softly, finally. And it says, "This isn't love." You hear it after the last lie, after the last time you excused the pain, after the last apology that felt empty, after you realize you're the only one trying. That's the moment it all begins to change. You don't explode. You don't beg. You don't threaten. You just stop. You stop chasing explanations. You stop defending your heart. You stop believing that more patience will save what keeps breaking, because you finally see it for what it is. Not love, not care, not partnership. It was a performance, a habit, a hollow rhythm where you gave and they took. You used to replay conversations, overthink every word, wonder if you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But now you feel something new. Stillness. It doesn't mean you're okay. It means you've reached the place where pretending is more painful than facing the truth. They may still reach out, still act as if things are normal, still expect you to fold like you used to, but they don't realize the version of you that stayed is gone, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to let go. You're not walking away from them, you're walking back to you, back to the version of yourself that remembers what peace feels like, back to the one who doesn't explain away emotional neglect, back to the one who knows that love should never feel like proving your worth. You may still feel the ache, the grief of what could have been, the mourning of what you gave, the sadness of being unseen, but don't confuse sadness with weakness. This sadness is sacred. It means you cared. It means you were real in a world that's often not. They'll tell themselves you changed, that you became distant, cold, indifferent. But that's not the truth. You just stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer you a bandage. You stopped handing your heart to those who saw it as fragile instead of valuable. And in that space, you began to heal. Not loudly, not publicly, but deeply. You started making peace with your past, stopped searching for closure from people who feared accountability, stopped accepting the bare minimum and calling it love. You outgrew the chaos. And here's the truth. They'll feel it, not right away, not all at once, but eventually, in the silence that follows your absence, in the moments they reach for comfort and find it missing, in the way everything starts to feel harder without your energy holding it together. They'll feel the weight of what they let go, the quiet brilliance of what they couldn't hold. Weren't just someone they talked to. You were someone who listened with your soul, who gave without expectation, who loved from a place most people will never understand. And that kind of energy doesn't come around twice. So they'll keep searching, not for someone new, but for someone who feels like you. But no one will, because you're not just a person. You're an experience, a sanctuary, a mirror that revealed the truth. You made them feel safe, not because they deserved it, but because you chose to. And now, without you, they'll feel exposed, not because you revealed anything, but because your silence reflects what words never could. It shows them who they became and who they lost in the process. They won't admit it, maybe not even to themselves, but they'll know. Every time peace feels distant, every time love feels performative, every time connection feels forced. They'll remember what real felt like, what presence without condition looked like, what a calm soul with fierce love sounded like. And by then you'll be gone, not in bitterness, but in alignment. You won't hate them. You'll simply be unavailable. Unavailable for inconsistency, unavailable for emotional manipulation, unavailable for anything that costs your peace. Because now you know, you are not responsible for someone else's healing, not responsible for saving people who enjoy drowning, not responsible for proving your heart to people who treat it like a test. Your love isn't up for debate. Your peace isn't a reward for good behavior. Your presence isn't a lifeline to be used and forgotten. You are sacred, and the moment you realized that, the moment you stopped begging, stopped explaining, stopped hoping they'd see it, that's when your healing began, and their reckoning, well, that's just beginning. They used to feel powerful when they ignored you, when they made you doubt yourself, when they kept you uncertain, dangling between hope and disappointment. They thought silence was a weapon, one they could use against you to keep you small, to make you chase, to keep the control. But now, you've taken silence back. It no longer means confusion, it means clarity. It no longer comes from pain, it comes from peace. It's not passive, it's powerful. Because this time, your silence isn't waiting. It's closing the chapter, closing the door, closing the space where your love was once mishandled. They thought you would always be there, always forgive, always bend. But they forgot that even the kindest hearts have limits. Even the most loyal souls have boundaries, and once crossed, you don't go back. You don't revisit what tried to break you. Now they sit with a version of you they never prepared for, the version that doesn't explain, the version that doesn't engage, the version that has nothing left to prove. They used to mistake your gentleness for weakness, thought your grace was a guarantee, believed your empathy meant you'd never walk away. But now they're learning that your silence is not absence, it's evolution. It's the evidence that you've outgrown what once held you down. They'll scroll through your old messages, revisit your old photos, hear your name in songs and stories and moments they didn't expect. They'll feel something, a twinge, a weight, presence that's no longer theirs, and they'll call it nostalgia. They'll call it regret. But it's more than that, it's realization. Realization that they had something sacred, and they let it slip through fingers, too proud to grasp it properly. They'll replay moments where you tried, moments where you cried, moments where you gave more than anyone should ever have to give. And they'll realize you weren't difficult, you were deep, you weren't dramatic, you were honest, you weren't too much. You were exactly what they didn't know how to hold. They may try to replace you, mirror the connection, recreate the feeling, but love born from ego can't replicate what was given from the soul. And when every new connection fails to feel like home, when every smile feels staged, when every conversation feels shallow, they'll come to understand you were the peace, not the problem. You were the truth, not the test. You were the healing, not the harm. And that, knowing, it won't be loud. It will settle quietly in their chest, in the way joy feels harder to find, in the way sleep comes slower, in the way life feels heavier. Without your energy in it, they may never say it, but they'll feel it. Because what you gave was never small. You held their chaos, softened their storms, carried love like it was oxygen, and gave it like it was endless. But it wasn't. Even you have limits. And when they crossed them, you didn't erupt. You withdrew. And in that quiet retreat, lost access, not to attention, but to real care, not to contact, but to connection. Because once your heart closes, it doesn't reopen through regret. It doesn't respond to panic. It doesn't return for potential. It only answers to change. But that change, that's no longer your concern. You've learned that love is not about proving yourself to someone unwilling to see you. It's not about pouring endlessly into an empty cup. It's not about breaking yourself to hold someone else together. You've learned to love from overflow, not depletion. To give with discernment, not desperation. Walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you started loving yourself more. And now your silence carries a new kind of strength. It says, I don't chase what confuses me. I don't beg to be seen. I don't shrink for comfort. You are not angry. You are not cold. You are simply done. And that is the kind of ending that echoes louder than anything spoken. They'll hear it in their own mind, in their own loneliness, in the empty spaces they once filled with your presence, because silence doesn't scream, it reflects. And in that reflection, they'll finally see themselves, not the version they pretended to be, but the one that cost them everything real. And by then you'll be long gone, not just out of their life, but out of reach, not out of revenge, but out of growth, because you didn't rise by punishing them. You rose by refusing to stay where love had to be earned, through pain. That's the kind of healing that doesn't need applause. It just needs space. And you've created that space, not for them to return, but for you to rebuild, because now you know your silence isn't empty. It's full of everything they never valued. And that silence, that's their karma. They never expected the silence to last this long. At first they thought you were just emotional, that you needed time, that you'd come back like you always did. But days turned to weeks, weeks to months. And still, nothing, no message, no reaction, no update. That's when it started to sink in. This silence isn't temporary, it's transformation. Because this time, you weren't trying to be distant, you weren't punishing them, you were healing. And healing doesn't ask for permission. They kept checking their phone, expecting a notification, expecting you to explain yourself, expecting you to give them another chance to ignore your worth. But silence speaks. And it said everything you couldn't put into words. It said, I gave you chances in conversations. I gave you truth in my tears. I gave you loyalty in moments you never deserved. And now I give you silence. They still don't know how to sit with it. They fill the space with noise, new people, new distractions, temporary validations, but none of it feels right, because nothing replaces energy that was pure. Nothing replaces the feeling of being loved by someone who expected nothing in return, who saw your flaws and stayed, who didn't need to control you to care for you. You were a different kind of love, the rare kind, the kind that felt like home. And now they're lost in houses that look impressive, but feel hollow. They try to laugh, like nothing's wrong, post, like they've moved on, talk like they're healed, but silence lives in their moments alone. It creeps in between conversations, shows up in the quiet parts of the night, sits with them when the world is done watching, and it whispers, you lost something sacred. Not because it was taken, but because you didn't protect it. You didn't believe they'd actually walk away, did you? You thought kindness meant permanence, that loyalty meant tolerance, that love meant unconditional access. But love without respect isn't love. And now you respect yourself enough to not re-enter what once made you question your own value. That's the part they didn't see coming. Not that you left, but that you stayed gone. You see, it wasn't that you were too emotional, you just felt deeply. It wasn't that you were too sensitive, You were just aware of every shift, every change in tone, every withdrawal of energy. You felt them checking out long before they admitted it. You felt the loyalty fade, the warmth cool, the connection fracture, and still, you stayed until staying started to feel like self-abandonment, until silence became the only thing left you hadn't tried. And now it's your power. They don't know what to do with your silence, because they can't manipulate it, can't debate it, can't twist it into guilt. It just exists. Constant, unshakable, final. It mirrors their own behavior, their own choices, their own carelessness, and that mirror is brutal. It shows them the truth they kept avoiding, that you were the glue, you were the grounding, you were the one who showed up again and again, even when you shouldn't have. Now they sit with the reality that their ego was louder than their heart, that their pride cost them something priceless. You weren't perfect, but you were present. And presence is everything, especially in a world full of absence. Now they search for you in playlists, in memories, in people who wear the right mask, but have none of your soul. But it's too late, because your silence didn't just begin the day you stopped talking. It began the moment you stopped needing their validation. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped rehearsing comebacks. You stopped writing messages you'd never send. And in that stillness, you found strength. They won't understand it. They'll confuse it with coldness, with distance, with ego. But silence is not pride, it's peace, the kind that comes when you realize your worth doesn't require an audience, when you understand that protecting your heart doesn't make you hard, it makes you wise. You don't owe anyone access to you, especially not those who treated your openness like weakness. And so you stay silent, not in punishment, but in preservation, not in anger, but in alignment. Because you finally understand, you don't need to prove you were the blessing. You just needed to remove yourself long enough for them to feel what life looks like without you in it. And now they do. In every missed moment, in every conversation that doesn't hit the same, in every connection that lacks your depth, they feel it. They just won't say it. But you don't need them to, because your silence said everything. And they heard it too late. You didn't set out to teach them a lesson. You weren't trying to make them feel what you felt. You just wanted to be understood, seen, held, chosen. But when that didn't happen, when they kept taking you for granted, you did the hardest thing a loving heart can do. You stopped trying, not out of resentment, but out of realization. You began to understand that healing isn't loud. It's not a dramatic exit or a long speech. It's quiet, internal, intentional. It's waking up one morning and not checking your phone for their message. It's hearing their name and feeling nothing but distance. It's deleting the hope you kept alive long after it died in them. You stopped romanticizing their potential, stopped confusing chemistry with consistency, stopped mistaking attachment for love. And in that shift, everything changed. You used to think silence meant losing, that if you didn't fight harder, love would slip away. But now you know, silence isn't surrender. It's wisdom. You don't argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't beg people to treat you like you matter. You don't pour into cups that poke holes in the bottom. That kind of giving isn't love. It's self-erasure, and you were tired of disappearing to keep them comfortable. So you left, not with noise, but with clarity. You stopped over-explaining your worth, stopped shrinking your light, stopped compromising your soul, just to keep them from leaving. Because here's the truth, they never wanted to face. They didn't lose you when you walked away. They lost you every time they made you feel like you didn't matter. Every time they laughed off your pain, dismissed your feelings, ghosted your vulnerability. They lost you in moments they thought you'd never leave. Now they look for signs. You're still watching, still hurting, still hoping, but there's nothing to find. No post for attention, no cryptic message, no indirect plea, just silence. And that silence feels heavy, not because it's empty, but because it's full of everything you never said. All the chances you gave, all the times you stayed, all the pain you buried, just to preserve the bond. You did the emotional labor, the emotional lifting, the emotional sacrifice, and in the end, it still wasn't enough. But that's not your failure, it's their inability to receive something real. They thought your softness meant weakness, that your forgiveness meant forgetfulness, that your silence meant surrender. But now they know it meant strength, because walking away from what you love, when it no longer honors you, that takes a courage most never develop. They stayed in control when you were confused, detached when you were loyal, silent when you were begging for clarity. Now the roles have reversed. You found peace, and they found the void. The space you once filled now echoes. They try to distract themselves, act unbothered, stay busy, but the heart doesn't lie. Weren't just a chapter. You were the story, the moment they truly felt held, seen, loved without condition. But they mistook that love as replaceable. And now they're surrounded by people who match their energy, not their depth. Shallow compliments, surface-level conversations, transactional affection, none of it nourishes the way you did, because you gave from the soul, not from the ego. And that kind of love, it doesn't come twice. They may meet others, feel infatuation, feel excitement, but peace, they won't find that again. Not the kind you offered, the kind that felt like home, the kind that saw through their chaos and chose to stay until you couldn't anymore. And now they finally understand that silence doesn't just end relationships. It rewrites the story, because in the quiet, they're left alone, not with your voice, but with their choices. They can no longer run from the truth that they sabotaged something sacred, not because you changed, but because they never did. And you're no longer their mirror, no longer their comfort, no longer their anchor. You've become untouchable, not out of pride, but out of growth. They'll keep waiting for a sign, window, a crack in the wall, but there's none. Because once you heal, you stop bleeding for people who never learned how to bandage wounds. You stop offering softness to those who only know how to break it. You stop going back to pain just because it once felt like love. They'll call it cold, say you're heartless, say you moved on too fast. But deep down, they know this isn't revenge. It's the consequence of never choosing you when it mattered. And now, your absence is louder than your presence ever was. That's not punishment, that's karma, wrapped in silence. There's a moment they'll never talk about. A moment too quiet to post, too painful to admit, too honest to ignore. It doesn't happen when they lose you, it happens when they realize what they lost, when the noise fades, when the attention dries up, when the distractions stop working, and they're left with themselves and silence. It comes unexpectedly in a song you both used to love, in a place that still smells like you, in a conversation that feels empty without your insight. And suddenly, they feel it, all of it, not just the absence, but the weight of it, the shape of it, the reality of what they let go. They remember the moments you stayed when others left, the way you listened when they had no words, the softness you gave, even when you were the one breaking. They remember the warmth, the loyalty, the way you showed up without needing to be asked. They never said it then, but now they wish they had. I see you, I need you, I'm sorry, but it's too late, because time doesn't wait for clarity, and silence doesn't pause for regret. They didn't just lose a person, they lost a presence. And that kind of loss isn't healed with apologies. It's not undone with promises. It's not repaired by realization. It lives with them quietly, constantly. They go on with life, but they carry the echo. The way you smiled when they needed hope. The way you cared when they were careless. The way you made love feel safe. They'll search for that feeling in others. They'll chase that calm, that peace, that grounding, but they won't find it, because what you gave wasn't performative, wasn't transactional, wasn't temporary. It was soul level, and they'll realize something they never expected. You were the blessing they never learned how to hold. And you're no longer angry, no longer bitter, no longer trying to prove they were wrong. You've outgrown the version of you that tolerated the bare minimum. You've risen from the wreckage with grace, not because they deserved it, but because you did. You learned to be whole on your own, to sit with your pain without making it someone else's responsibility, to move forward without needing closure from someone who never gave it. Your peace is no longer up for negotiation. Your heart no longer seeks validation in the wrong hands. Your silence is no longer about them. It's about you, choosing stillness over noise, healing over proving, peace over performance. And maybe they'll reach out one day, trying to explain, trying to reconnect, trying to rewrite history. But you won't be angry. You won't even feel tempted. Because when you've truly healed, the past no longer calls you back. It reminds you why you never return. You won't answer out of pain, won't respond from the old wound. You'll stand in your new strength, and that strength speaks louder than revenge ever could. They'll feel it. In the gaps no one else can fill. In the connection they fumbled, in the love they lost. You don't need to wish them harm. Life already handled it, not through punishment, but through reflection, through silence. Because silence always finds its way home, to those who used noise to avoid their own conscience, to those who mistook kindness for weakness, to those who gambled with loyalty like it was limitless. So let them wonder, let them scroll, let them remember. Your life now is your message. Your peace is your proof. Your healing is your power. You're no longer the person they hurt. You're the person who rose anyway, who glowed anyway, who loved anyway, and still chose to walk away. They had the chance to hold something real, and they let it go. Now they live with echoes, while you live in peace. If you felt this in your soul, don't just keep it inside. You're not alone. Your story matters, and your silence speaks volumes. Share this with someone, still healing, still hoping, still holding on. Let them know they don't need revenge. They don't need closure. They just need peace, and they're allowed to choose it every single time.